Hey friends, and welcome back to Path of Exile for another Herald of Thunder build. Now I want to go ahead and take a run through Blood Aqueducts to see how the build is going, but while I'm doing that I'm going to explain kind of what's going on. Now, we are using an Occultist for Herald of Thunder. This is something that I've avoided before because Herald of Thunder damage scaling is hard enough without trying to also scale chaos damage. Unfortunately, Profane Bloom is a chaos skill, or deals chaos damage, so in order to maximize the effectiveness of Profane Bloom, we would have to scale chaos in some kind of way. We absolutely can't use anything that takes chaos damage off of the plate, like Oriana's Prototype. So, before, it limited us in a couple of different ways, and I didn't want to do that for a Herald of Thunder build, since it's already hard to scale on its own. What we're doing instead is we are using the newly updated Voltaxic Rift bow. What this bow is doing is converting all of our lightning damage into chaos damage, and so now we have a good reason and a good use case for converting all of our lightning damage into chaos damage. This does a couple things for us. Number one, converting damage is another way to scale damage, and so we can utilize some of that to get our Herald of Thunder damage a little higher. Now, this build is still very much in the early stages. I'm still trying to figure it out, make it feel good. Right now we're using a Despair on Hit ring with Mark of Submission, and eventually I would want to change that to another Storm Secret. We're also utilizing Hex Bloom to try and propagate some of those explosions, but it's still a little clunky. So as we go through this build, we will refine it more and make it feel better. But essentially, here's how the build is working. We've already covered Voltaxic Rift and our Despair on Hit ring, but the big key to this build right now is the Graven's Secret. This is converting all of our power charges into absorption charges and giving us the energy shield recoup we need to survive our Herald of Thunder incoming damage. Now, there are only two sources that I know of for energy shield recoup, and that is one from Graven's Secret and two from the 9 Lives Ascendancy passive that is only available to Witch through Forbidden Flesh and Flame. Eventually in this build, we are going to switch to those Forbidden Flesh and Flame jewels. However, those jewels are a little expensive. If you look here, you can see that just the Forbidden Flesh jewel is 6.5 divines. If we go to the Forbidden Flame, you'll see that this is extremely expensive. So this is a very, very high budget option. For now, we're going to keep using Graven. Now, some things that I really wanted to try is, again, we've got Voltaxic Rift doing all of our conversion and making our chaos damage able to shock, and this is very important. Original Sin is another way to convert our damage to chaos damage, but in order to shock, now we have to do some creative thinking. This item is not really something that I'm willing to buy, however it is something that I might try to farm. But in order to make it work, we would need something else to shock. What we would do then is we would utilize Shock Nova, because the ring of Shock Nova always shocks. The other option is to use something like Skitterbots, but that means that we have another aura skill, and that gets a little difficult on its own. The other thing that I was hoping would work is Sandstorm Visage. Unfortunately, it does not work. It falls under the spell damage modifiers category, so heralds will not benefit from this at all. I was hoping that this would be treated like the Shaper modifier that adjusts crit strike base chance, but it does not, unfortunately. This would have been the best in slot helmet if it had worked with heralds. Now, 9 lives is going to be our best option later on because it's going to give us 25% damage recoup, and it's going to increase that to over 3 seconds. But for now, again, because that is so expensive, we are using Graven's Secret. I've also got Spiritual Aid allocated, as that might be something we want to scale with later on. Outside of those things, this build is still very much in early development, as I really need to figure out how scaling Energy Shield is going to work on this character, because the more Energy Shield we have, the better off we're going to be. Alright, last up, we're going to take a look at the passive tree and see what we've got going on. This is a passive tree that I'm kind of experimenting with right now, as I am using voices instead of some normal passive large cluster jewels. And you can see down here we've got a regular one that we could be using instead. Now, the reason I'm doing this is to save on some ascendancy points and so we can use them in other places. So over here we can see that our DPS is 5.2, which is not too bad. I'm not too upset about that, but a lot of that damage is being taken away by Graven's Secret. You can see right here, if we take off Graven's Secret, we gain 2.1 million DPS just from unequipping that belt. If we equip another belt, we can actually get a lot more damage, since we can do something like getting Aspect of the Spider. Now we can also get Aspect of the Spider elsewhere. This is just the bare bones kind of wide view look at what's going on here. We have 3 Grand Spectrums for elemental damage. We have an Elegant Hubris with Supreme Ostentation to cut down on our requirements for attributes, as our bow is quite high on the dex requirement. And then we have a couple of Crit Strike Chance and Crit Strike Multi nodes over here to help increase our damage. With Spiritual Aid, we can also do things like Slumlord, but we don't have any of those allocated right now. And I think that about covers how the build is going and what the build should look like, but we'll see how it all shakes out as we go through the game. Unfortunately, the very high end of this build is going to be very expensive no matter how we do it, because at the highest end we need 9 lives in order to unequip the Graven Belt, which unlocks a huge amount of our damage potential. All that being said, this is being done without having several items, and this is also using a non-maxed helmet. The ideal helmet here would have an additional crit strike chance, which would give us a little more in the way of damage. The other thing to note here is that until we craft that helmet, we'll be using the equivalent body armor setup, which is a bunch of awakened gems, crit strike and crit damage. Now this does get us to 4 million DPS, which is pretty respectable for a body armor setup. No anomalous jewels, no level 21. We could grab a 21 to get a couple 100,000 damage, but that's about it. It's a very basic setup so far. I've not put too much into it. If you want to see the updates and keep up to date with how this build is going and how it progresses, be sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments below what you think of this build, and if you've got any other crazy ideas for Herald of Thunder. I know one of the people watching my videos is trying to put together a Mind Over Matter specific Herald of Thunder build for, I believe, the Guardian or the Hierophant, and I think that's super cool. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time.